In the fading light of 16th century Europe, where superstition still walked hand in hand with nobility, one woman's name would be whispered for centuries as both legend and warning. Countess Elisabetta d'Orvani, a Hungarian aristocrat whose life of privilege and beauty decayed into a reign of terror so secretive and so methodical that even the records of her crimes seemed to tremble under the weight of disbelief. She was born in 1560, at a time when noble blood was said to carry divine favor, and yet, from her earliest years, Elisabetta's world was marked not by sanctity, but by shadow. Her family, among the most powerful in Transylvania, had wealth beyond measure, estates that stretched from the Carpathian foothills to the plains of the Danube, but also a lineage stained with violence, madness, and whispers of occult learning. Her uncle had dabbled in alchemy. Her aunt, a reputed witch, was burned after accusations of summoning storms to ruin a rival's harvest. In this atmosphere of both refinement and fear, Elisabetta grew, educated in languages, philosophy, and the management of estates, yet isolated behind fortress walls that muffled the cries of the peasants who toiled for her family. Those who saw her as a girl spoke of her extraordinary intelligence and of a beauty that seemed almost supernatural, a stillness in her pale face that both enchanted and unsettled. By 15, she was betrothed to Count Matthias d'Orvani, a soldier celebrated for his brutality in wars against the Ottomans. Their union, forged for power more than love, joined two of the oldest families in Hungary, and when the wedding procession wound its way through the mountain roads toward Szeged Castle, villagers gathered to glimpse the young bride in her carriage of white horses. Few imagined that the same castle, centuries later, would be remembered as one of Europe's most cursed places. While her husband campaigned on distant battlefields, Elisabetta governed alone, presiding over hundreds of servants and soldiers with an iron poise that earned both admiration and fear. She administered justice, oversaw harvests, and wrote letters to neighboring nobles in a hand so elegant it was said even her penmanship carried authority. Yet isolation has a way of corroding reason. The winters were long, the corridors vast, and the silence between stone walls thick enough to distort the sound of conscience. Those closest to her began to notice strange habits. She avoided mirrors, bathed only by candlelight, and kept jars of rare unguents said to preserve the skin. When asked about her secret, she would smile and say, "Time obeys those who command it." At first, her eccentricities were dismissed as vanity, but soon the servants whispered that the Countess had changed since her husband's absence, that she no longer aged, that her complexion glowed as if illuminated from within, and that sometimes, in the dead of night, the faint scent of iron drifted through the halls. In the countryside below, peasant families depended on her goodwill. She was known to offer employment to young girls from nearby villages, promising them education, wages, and respectability as maids within the d'Orvani household. To families struggling through famine, it seemed a blessing. But soon, mothers noticed that their daughters never wrote home, and when they inquired, messengers returned with vague replies. The girl had married or moved or fallen ill. The local priest, Father Kalman, kept a quiet record of these disappearances, dozens over the span of years, yet his letters to the bishop went unanswered. Nobility, after all, was rarely questioned. By the turn of the century, Count Matthias was dead, said to have succumbed to wounds sustained in war, though rumors claimed poison. The widowed countess withdrew into mourning and emerged dressed entirely in white. Not the black of grief, but the pale shade of renewal. It was around this time that the first credible accounts of her atrocities surfaced, though they would remain buried in royal archives for decades. Witnesses later testified that Elisabetta, obsessed with preserving her youth, believed that human blood, especially that of virgins, contained a vital essence capable of reversing age. Her experiments began as superstition, but evolved into ritual. Inside the castle's eastern wing, she converted a series of chambers into what she termed curative rooms, fitted with copper basins, chains, and wooden frames used to suspend the victims. She was assisted by a circle of servants and local women, the so-called white handmaids, who procured victims and concealed the evidence. They lured peasant girls under pretense of domestic service, stripped them of names and freedom, and delivered them to the Countess, who believed she was conducting acts of divine purification. The methods described in later testimonies defy reason, but were documented with the precision of an accountant. Some girls were drained of blood using surgical instruments brought from Vienna. Others were beaten until the skin broke, then collected in bowls for bathing. The Countess claimed these procedures cured headaches and palpitations, that they infused vigor and clarity of mind. She recorded observations in a crimson-bound ledger, fragments of which survive, describing variations in hue, temperature, and duration. "Blood of youth," she wrote, "is the elixir denied by heaven, yet gifted to the determined." To outsiders, Szeged Castle still appeared orderly. Guests were entertained with lavish banquets, music, and the Countess's famed wine. But beneath the floorboards, rot spread. Servants who questioned her vanished. When a steward dared to confront her with evidence of missing wages for the dismissed maids, he fell from a balcony that very night, his skull shattered on the cobblestones below. The coroner called it misstep. The household called it lesson. Her reputation among the nobility, however, remained untarnished. Elisabetta corresponded with scholars, donated to monasteries, and hosted gatherings that attracted poets and generals. To those circles, she was an eccentric widow preserving her dignity through intellect and beauty. But among the peasants, she became something else entirely. A specter, a curse. Stories spread of lights moving in the castle towers long after midnight, of screams muffled by the wind, of crimson-tinged snow that appeared after storms. Parents forbade their daughters from traveling alone near Dorvani lands, and yet desperation drew them still. Hunger and hope are stronger than fear. In 1604, a visiting noblewoman named Clara Nemitz, fascinated by Elisabetta's ageless appearance, sought her advice for maintaining youth. The Countess received her graciously, sharing tales of herbs and minerals, until at last she revealed her secret ingredient. Whether in jest or confession, she told Clara that vitality resided in the essence of life itself, that the purest form of beauty could only be sustained by communion with it. Clara, terrified, fled, and later recounted the exchange to her husband, but he dismissed it as hysteria. When he finally petitioned the royal court to investigate, he was silenced through debt and scandal, evidence, perhaps, of the Countess's influence reaching far beyond her walls. By the late 1600s, the body count had risen beyond concealment. Snowmelt exposed shallow graves behind the stables. A hunter discovered bones gnawed clean in the forest ravine. The local magistrate, pressed by the clergy, dispatched inspectors, but none returned with charges. It was said the Countess entertained them so lavishly that they left convinced the rumors were slander invented by envious peasants. Only when a girl of noble birth disappeared did the shield of privilege begin to crack. Anna Darvulia, a companion of the Countess, confessed on her deathbed that her mistress's thirst for youth had become uncontrollable, that she no longer distinguished between peasant and patrician. The court could no longer ignore it. In 1610, King Matthias II appointed Lord Georgi Thurzo to investigate. Riding under the pretext of friendly visit, Thurzo and his men arrived at Cheste one snow-laden night in December. What they found was chronicled in depositions that would later circulate through Europe, fueling centuries of fascination. In the lower chambers, soldiers discovered a dying girl stretched upon a table, another lying lifeless on the floor, her body pale and drained. The walls were stained dark, the air thick with metallic scent. Nearby stood a copper tub filled halfway with a viscous fluid. Candles still burned, and in their flicker stood the Countess unflinching, as though she had been awaiting them. "You come unannounced," she said, her voice calm. "The hour is sacred." Thurzo ordered her arrest, but even as they bound her, she smiled. A faint, knowing smile that unnerved the hardened soldiers. The subsequent trial was a spectacle of horror and politics. Dozens of witnesses, including surviving servants, testified to the atrocities. One described carrying buckets of blood to the bath. Another spoke of burying bodies at night under frost-hardened soil. The white handmaids, interrogated under torture, confirmed the rituals, claiming that the Countess believed herself chosen by forces older than the Church. Yet, despite overwhelming evidence, Elisabetta was never publicly tried. The monarchy feared scandal that might stain the nobility. Instead, judgment was delivered privately. She would be confined within her own castle, its windows bricked, its doors sealed, leaving only a narrow slit for food. Her accomplices were executed. She was left to age in darkness. For 4 years, she remained in that stone tomb. Guards later testified that she spoke to unseen visitors, reciting verses and prayers in languages they did not understand. Some nights, a thin voice would echo through the passage, "I am still beautiful." In August 1614, when a servant failed to hear her for several days, they opened the chamber to find her seated before a mirror, dead. In her lap lay a fragment of parchment bearing only 3 words, "Vita per sanguinem," life through blood. She was buried without ceremony, her coffin placed in the family crypt, though legends claim the villagers exhumed her body and hid it elsewhere, fearful that she would rise again. In the decades that followed, the story of Countess Elisabetta d'Orvani spread across Europe, merging with older superstitions and giving rise to one of history's most enduring archetypes, the noble vampire, the eternal woman who feeds upon youth. Historians argue over the truth. Some see her as a murderer driven by madness, others as a victim of patriarchal propaganda, her crimes exaggerated to suppress powerful women. Yet in the villages of northern Hungary, the myth persists. Travelers still speak of candlelight glimmering through the bricked windows of Chejte Castle on winter nights, of a figure in white walking the battlements when the moon turns red. Roses still bloom crimson at the ruins even under snow, and the air carries a faint scent of iron and lilies. Whether fact or folklore, the legacy of the Blood Countess endures as a mirror to humanity's oldest obsession, the desire to conquer time, whatever the cost. When the Countess of Blood died in her sealed chamber, Europe exhaled. But it was not the breath of relief, rather the sigh of a world that knew it had witnessed something it could never quite bury. Sejte Castle, once a symbol of feudal power, became a mausoleum of whispers. The soldiers who had guarded her cell were dismissed quietly, the documents of her confinement sealed under royal decree, and the Dorvani family's estates were divided among distant relatives who avoided the castle as if it carried plague. Yet legends have a way of surviving in the dark corners of memory, feeding on fear, curiosity, and time itself. Within months of her death, stories began to move, first among peasants who claimed to see lights flickering in her tower at night, then among monks who reported hearing soft singing echo from beneath the chapel. In the years that followed, Chejte became a destination for the desperate and the devout alike. Mothers who brought sick children to touch the castle gates, believing the Countess's cursed blood might heal, and pilgrims who came to pray for forgiveness in the shadow of her sins. The Church, uneasy with this strange devotion, declared the site an abomination and ordered its chapel sealed. But it was too late. Myth had already outrun authority. Throughout the 17th century, pamphlets and chronicles began to circulate across the continent, blending truth with imagination. Some called her the Hungarian Jezebel, others the Scarlet Widow, and soon her name became entangled with older legends, the Strigoi of Wallachia, the Revenants of Moravia, the Blood Witches of Bohemia. In taverns and courts alike, people spoke of the noblewoman who drank youth, of her copper tub filled with crimson light, of her laughter echoing from beyond the grave. The Enlightenment would later mock these tales as superstition, yet scholars of the time could not resist documenting them. In 1725, a Jesuit historian named Father Albrecht von Kormos published a treatise titled On the Nature of the Blood Rituals of the Carpathians, in which he analyzed the Dorvani case as evidence of demonic possession. He cited testimonies from soldiers and servants, described the geography of Sejte in obsessive detail, and concluded that the Countess's crimes were the culmination of pride's rebellion against the natural decay of the flesh. His work was banned by the Vatican within months, yet copies spread underground, cherished by alchemists and occultists seeking the same forbidden knowledge she was accused of mastering. By the dawn of the 18th century, the name Elisabetta Dorvani had become a metaphor, a way for Europe to confront its obsession with beauty and control. While noblewomen painted their faces with lead and mercury to appear youthful, they whispered of the Countess who had gone further than all of them, who had dared to extract youth directly from the living. Artists painted her portrait in secret, imagining her surrounded by mirrors and candles, her skin untouched by time. In one famous engraving, published anonymously in Paris in 1768, she is depicted holding a goblet shaped like a heart, her reflection half skull, half angel. Beneath it were the words, "She drank what we all desire." Philosophers, too, used her story as moral lesson. Voltaire wrote of her briefly in his letters, calling her the perfect image of tyranny disguised as vanity. Yet even his rational mockery could not erase the fascination that clung to her name. The Napoleonic Wars reduced much of Hungary's old nobility to ruins, and Sejte Castle was abandoned completely by 1806. Nature reclaimed the walls. Ivy crawled over battlements. Bats nested in towers, and the main hall filled with debris. Still, travelers recorded strange impressions. A French officer passing through the region wrote of an evening spent near the ruins when his horse refused to enter the courtyard, trembling violently until led away. He described hearing faint footsteps on the upper floors, though no stairs remained. Others spoke of a woman in white glimpsed among the columns, carrying a candle that burned blue instead of gold. Local superstition grew until the castle became a place avoided by all except those who sought the thrill of fear. In 1815, a physician named Dr. Istvan Rákóczi visited Cheste to investigate what he called folk hysteria. Skeptical of ghosts, he spent 2 nights within the castle ruins, recording temperature, air quality, and acoustics. On the second night, according to his diary, he felt a sudden chill, though his instruments registered no change. The candles flickered, and he heard what he described as the faint sound of water, though no source existed. The next morning, he discovered damp crimson stains on the stone floor where none had been before. His notes, preserved in the Budapest archives, end with a final line. Perhaps she is not gone, only waiting for another who believes. The 19th century saw the birth of the vampire myth as Europe's favorite horror, and in that transformation, the Countess of Blood found new life. Writers such as Sheridan Le Fanu and later Bram Stoker borrowed freely from the Hungarian legends. Though Stoker's Dracula would set its heart in Transylvania, the Countess's ghost haunted its shadows. The idea of a noble predator who sustains her immortality through the lifeblood of others. Scholars have long debated whether Elisabetta Dorvani was Stoker's unspoken muse. In private letters, he referred to an ancient Hungarian lady who bathed in red to remain white, suggesting the inspiration was undeniable. Through fiction, her sins became myth, and through myth, immortality. But history, unlike myth, never sleeps entirely. In 1895, during renovations ordered by a descendant of the Dorvany family, workers uncovered a sealed room beneath the chapel. Inside lay a collection of rusted tools, shattered glass vessels, and a human skeleton chained to the wall. Among the debris, they found a small copper locket engraved with the initials E.D., and inside it, a lock of black hair preserved as though untouched by centuries. The discovery reignited debate across Europe. Newspapers ran sensational headlines. The vampire Countess found. Bloodbath chamber unearthed. Scientists from Vienna and Prague examined the remains, concluding that the tools were medical in nature. Early surgical instruments used for bloodletting, and speculated that the Countess had been experimenting with primitive transfusions. Their findings blurred the line between myth and medicine, turning what had been dismissed as superstition into a grim possibility of early scientific obsession. Throughout the 20th century, the legend of the Countess evolved with each generation. Psychologists studied her as a case of narcissistic pathology. Feminists reinterpreted her as a symbol of how powerful women were demonized. Filmmakers turned her into a Gothic icon draped in velvet and sin. Yet none of these retellings could fully capture the unease that lingers around her true story, that somewhere beneath the monstrous exaggeration lies a very human truth, the terror of decay, the refusal to accept mortality. In 1931, a Hungarian historian named Dr. Lajos Nemeth published the first comprehensive archive of the Dorvany trial documents. Hidden for 3 centuries, these papers revealed that much of what was recorded against her came from tortured confessions of servants desperate to survive. Some historians began to wonder if Elisabetta had been guilty at all, or if she had been a victim of political intrigue designed to seize her lands. The debate split academia. Was she a vampire or a scapegoat? A demon or a defiant woman destroyed by rumor? Each generation found in her the reflection it wanted. During World War II, the castle fell within a battle zone, shelled and burned. Soldiers on both sides used its ruins as shelter. After the war, villagers rebuilding nearby claimed that bones unearthed during excavation refused to stay buried, that after storms they would reappear on the surface, gleaming white against the mud. Communist authorities dismissed these as tales of ignorance, but the government nonetheless ordered the site fenced off. For decades, it stood silent, overgrown, forbidden. Only in the 1980s did historians gain access again. Among them was a young anthropologist named Eva Sindre, who spent months cataloging the ruins. Her report, never officially published, described finding traces of animal and human DNA in soil samples beneath the East Tower. Too degraded to confirm, but enough to suggest that something indeed had been spilled there, over and over. She wrote privately to a colleague, "Whatever she did, she believed it worked. That belief alone has power." And so the legend persisted, not as a relic, but as a mirror. In the modern age, where youth is sold in jars and clinics promise the reversal of time, the Countess of Blood has returned in another form. Biotech companies experiment with transfusions of young plasma to rejuvenate the elderly. Billionaires fund research into age reversal. Each new headline, "Youth from the Blood of the Young," feels like an echo of her whispers. The methods have changed. The instruments gleam stainless instead of rusted, but the hunger is the same. Even in laboratories of glass and steel, the shadow of Elisabetta d'Orvani flickers, reminding us that every pursuit of eternal youth begins with the same temptation: to take what is not ours to keep. Today, the ruins of Szeged stand open to visitors. Tour guides speak of history, not horror. Yet as dusk settles over the valley, even skeptics fall silent. The wind moves through the corridors like breath, and from certain angles, the shadows shape themselves into the outline of a woman standing at a window that no longer exists. Locals avoid the place after dark. They say the air smells faintly metallic when rain falls, that the roses still bloom blood red, even when the ground is frozen, and that, if one listens long enough, a voice can be heard beneath the wind, soft, elegant, whispering in a tongue older than the castle itself. Some claim she asks for forgiveness. Others say she offers a warning. But the bravest visitors who stay until midnight tell of something stranger still: a flicker of light beneath the earth, a glow from where her chamber once lay, as though the candles she burned 400 years ago have never gone out. One winter evening, a researcher from Budapest University spent the night there alone, conducting an acoustic study. His equipment captured faint vibrations that, when amplified, formed a rhythmic pattern resembling a heartbeat. When asked to explain, he only said, "It was too slow to be human, too steady to be echo." His report remains unpublished, sealed by the Institute at his request. Those who read fragments of it say he ended with a line that chills the blood. Perhaps immortality is not what we imagine, not endless life, but endless memory. And that is perhaps the truest curse of the Countess of Blood. 4 centuries after her death, Her name is still spoken, her story still retold, her face still imagined in paintings and films and nightmares. While empires have fallen, while nations have changed, she endures, neither saint nor monster, but something in between, the embodiment of humankind's oldest desire and deepest dread. Time could not destroy her. It merely gave her new forms. And so she remains, not buried in earth, but etched into our collective mind. Every mirror that reflects vanity, every experiment that promises youth, every whisper that asks, "What would you give to stay beautiful forever?" Somewhere in that question, she lives again. And when the wind sweeps over the Carpathian hills and brushes the crumbling stones of Sejte Castle, it carries a faint sound, not of sorrow, but of quiet laughter, soft and knowing, as if the Countess herself still watches the passing centuries and smiles at the world that once condemned her, but now follows her path more faithfully than she ever dreamed.